Rafi Salazar, welcome to the Busy Working Show. How have you been?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
It's a little hot here in Augusta, but you know how that feels.
Oh yeah, 111 degrees, they say.
That's right. Heat index, baby. So, well, good. Well, Rafi, tell us what you do and how did you get to this point in your career?
Sure. It's a long story, but the short version is I am a healthcare positioning strategist. I help healthcare. What I say is I help innovative healthcare companies humanize healthcare. Part of that involves helping them say the right thing to the right healthcare stakeholder. And it's been a long, winding road to get here. Started out as a clinician, did some time as a professor, did some consulting on the operations and kind of case management, utilization side
Mhm.
of things. And then that kind of blended into doing business development and marketing and positioning strategy stuff.
Gotcha. So, of all of those things that you've done, what is your favorite?
I don't know. I think ultimately, just because of what I believe the value healthcare providers bring to the table, I value very much. We call it knowledge translation in the clinical business, but teaching people. That's probably why I was drawn to be a professor in the first place. That's why I
Mhm.
love having students come in and work at the clinic that I own, and why I wrote the book and all that. I just really like teaching. So the same principle applies in the work that I do with the strategic work with healthcare organizations, right? It's some of it is just a kind of a knowledge transfer approach is
Mhm.
what we take here.
Yeah. So, when you talk about humanizing healthcare, what does that mean? I mean, we're we've got clinicians and doctors dealing with human beings, but what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think ultimately it means that the fundamental basis for healthcare is that it is a human relationship. Like you said, it's a doctor or it's a clinician working with a patient who's on their own unique road to recovery. And often what happens, partly because of the way the system is set up and the way we reimburse and pay for healthcare, which is its own conversation, but the
Yeah.
incentives within healthcare and really in large healthcare organizations where you have big bureaucratic processes is that we're going to take this person, but we're not going to see them as a person. We're going to see them as like a rotator cuff that needs to be repaired or something like that. And we're going to put this rotator cuff through our workflow. And what ends up happening is we take a very much top down approach where we as the clinicians or the healthcare organization get the things that we need, and then maybe when that's through, once we filter the patient through that, maybe we worry about what's going on with them and their specific circumstances, their context. It's really putting people through or shuffling people through a series of workflows rather than taking like a bottom up approach, which is, all right, let's start with Rafi. What's going on with him? Why is this important to
Mhm.
him? What treatments might make more sense? How do we build a process of care around an individual rather than the other way around, trying to take these people and shove them through our workflows that are working for our own efficiencies rather than for their own benefit?
Yeah. So, at what point in your career did you see this as needing to be filled? This role needing to be filled, and you moving towards that?
Yeah, I think it was like my first job when I worked. I worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Obviously, that's like a huge healthcare organization, big bureaucratic
Hmm.
mess. I mean, like if you wanted to like move the clock in the clinic, you had to call a work order into three different departments,
Oh
and that's how they
gosh.
managed patient care as well. So,
Hmm.
working there, I was put through one of their. It was called their Senior Executive Service Development Program or something. Um, it put me in a position where I was as a clinician, I was day to day treating patients. And then like one day a week, I was in the C-suite kind of learning and observing and kind of being part
Hmm.
of these higher level discussions
Yeah.
at the organization. And what I realized was that a lot, if not all, of the decisions that were being made in the C-suite were being made by people who maybe they weren't even clinicians. They were MBAs, maybe they were project
Hmm.
managers, but they were looking at spreadsheets and data, and that's what they were basing the decisions off of, which at some level you need to make the numbers work, right? Like we need to make
Sure.
money or else we go out of business. But
Yeah.
they were making decisions based off of data without any real connection to the implications of that decision and what that meant for a veteran receiving care at the facility. And it was kind of right then that it started the wheels spinning in my own head about, okay, like what does this mean? How do we make good, informed business decisions that don't end up impacting negatively the effect that we can have as clinicians? And that kind of led me down the rabbit hole that brought me to where we are today.
Yeah. So as you're building this iteration of what you've learned, and you're building your model out, what have you learned along the ways, or who do you emulate from a thought of legacy? Do you think of building a legacy? And if you're in that mindset, who are you emulating in that?
Yeah, I don't know if I spend a whole lot of time thinking about legacy, like very concretely. I do think that, I might have even mentioned this in the book. Like I think when I think about my legacy or what happens when I'm done, like I would like healthcare, I would like the industry to be better because of me having been involved in it. But that's probably about as far as I go. I feel like what I have to do is the task that's in front of me. So sometimes it's working with a healthcare organization, sometimes it's working with a healthcare technology company, and the ability that they're going to have to affect multiple, hopefully thousands of lives in the way care is delivered. Maybe it's the clinic that I own and operate when I meet with the leadership team here. And, how do we manage these specific, a couple hundred patients that are coming through the clinic every month? And that's kind of where it's at for me, is that I'm really looking at how do I affect systems or organizations that are going to have a much farther reaching effect than I can have like on a one-on-one basis. But that's about as far as I've gone with the whole legacy thinking. I'm not looking at having bridges named after me or anything.
Oh, well, not yet, at least. Obviously.
Not yet. Yeah.
Not yet. It's rare that a living individual gets a bridge named after him. So we'll leave that for later. So you've mentioned twice a book. Tell me about this book that you've mentioned.
The book that I wrote?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I assume you wrote it. You said my book twice. So tell us about this book.
It's called Better Outcomes, A Guide to Humanizing Healthcare. And it is basically, it is a framework that I developed over the number of years working as an independent consultant with healthcare organizations, some of the research that I did at the university, some of my clinical background in the world of chronic pain and the treatment of trauma with combat veterans. And basically what it does is it lays out 8 commitments that the way I see them for healthcare organizations to really return the focus of healthcare to where it should be, which is people and not numbers and statistics. So, each chapter covers a different commitment, if you would.
Sure. Yeah. So from our conversation so far, you started as an employee at a big organization at the VA.
Yeah, cushy government job.
That's right. And then you left that and you were doing consulting, and then you purchased a practice. Now, how did that come to be? Was that just an opportunistic thing, or was that something that you really wanted to apply and get deeper with the consulting and be on both sides of it and have that domain knowledge?
Yeah, that was kind of what it was. So I was working at the time with I was an independent contractor, independent consultant working with a boutique consulting firm, and we were working with a state agency managing all kinds of care aspects for folks through the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities here in Georgia. And at the same time, I was working with independent healthcare organizations, small regional hospitals, private practices, on what we were calling at the time, and it's still kind of a buzzword in healthcare, patient engagement strategy. So basically, the question was, how do we make sure that patients actually become actively engaged in their treatment and their healthcare, as opposed to becoming passive recipients that don't follow up?
Yeah, exactly.
So I was doing that with healthcare organizations. And then around the time COVID happened, the contract with the state went away, and I had a bunch of money sitting around, and I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And
all the bags of money.
Exactly. No, I mean, it wasn't like tons and tons of money, but it was more than I needed. So I was thinking about investment, and I was thinking about kind of what's the next step in my career. And I said, it would be like a really like power move would be to buy a clinic that maybe was not performing super well financially, turn it around, and then kind of document that and use that as the case study for, the consulting work that I do. And It just so happened that there was a clinic about a mile and a half from my house. The owners were looking to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, the clinic was it had been beat up. The valuation had been beat up the years leading up to COVID, and then COVID kind of really pushed it over the edge. So it was a really good buy from a value perspective. And then it gave me kind of the ability to test all of these things that I've been doing with clients and other healthcare organizations, except now I could always go to them and go to prospects and be like, look, my nuts are on the line too now. Like
Yeah.
my neck is what I'm doing here, what I'm advising you to do is what I do in my own practice. And this is the growth we've seen in my own practice. And early
Mm-hmm.
on, after purchasing the practice, after the first year, we'd kind of turned it around. It was financially solvent again. Like there were early webinars that I did back in like 2021-ish, shortly after buying the business, that were like, okay, these are like some of the marketing things we did, and this is how, the ROI we got, or this is how we,
Mm-hmm.
lowered some of the cancellation rate, got people to show up, things like that. And it's been great. Now it's a way that I can keep my hand in the clinic every now and then. I work still a morning a week treating patients as a direct provider while I do all this other fun stuff, the podcast and the books and the consulting the rest of the
Yeah.
week.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how many you can come across. I mean, every consultant is running their own business as a consultant, but when you actually have that running your own consulting business with a practice at the same time, that's a different perspective that you can provide, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know you and I both know the folks over at Win Without Pitching. Blair End, he's
Oh
wonderful.
yeah.
A while back, he wrote an article or they did a podcast or something. It was called "Be the Client You Want to See in the World."
Oh yeah.
Um, and I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I'll just do that. I'll be the client I want to see in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
everything that we do at Proactive is what I would like every healthcare organization in the U.S. to do.
That's awesome. So the ones that you are consulting, um, do they have any mindset of being involved in the community, or is it just like your immediate patient focus? How does that work, if it works at all?
Yeah, I think at some level they do. If maybe it's a self-serving incentive that if you're active in the community, if people know you, you're going to get more patients, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Um, I really do think, and I say this a lot, that healthcare is a relationship business at some level, especially in like where I'm at in physical and occupational therapy. Like you're seeing your patients for a long period of time, usually a couple times a week for like 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
There's just a relationship gets developed there, and we can leverage that relationship on behalf of our patients to kind of help them affect change in their lives. But throughout like all the specialties in healthcare, subspecialties, GPs, you name it, like people need to trust their clinicians. So the clients that I work with that are doing really, really well are very active in their community, and maybe they're not like doing pop-up events or things like that, but maybe some of their clinicians are involved in like a specific niche, like maybe they're runners, or maybe they do CrossFit, or maybe they're involved in volunteering at food banks or something like that, whatever
Sure.
their
Yeah.
specific value system is, or whatever they enjoy doing in their off time, and they build relationships that way. I
Yeah.
like to say that the folks that get involved in healthcare are relationship people anyway. They're people. So whether or not they're doing it intentionally, most of the time they're building relationships with people, and then just so happens that they also work in healthcare, and it kind of helps feed and network some of that as well.
Yeah. That's good. I could see how that would be, a benefit personally and professionally to be involved in the community and to have that exposure and that connection. That what was that whole thing you said? Humanizing healthcare. Sure, that
Yeah,
has a
yeah.
lot to do with it. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Because I think I'd spend, especially in the early days when I was like trying to build the business up, the practice here. Like I had conversations with people all the time at almost every place that I went to about my back hurts, or my knee hurts, or my hip hurts, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, and I knew like 9 times out of 10 they were never going to come to the clinic right away.
Yeah.
But we had people show up a year later, 2 years later, whatever, or you talk to my cousin's brother's nephew, and now I've got carpal tunnel, and now I'm here. Like, so
Yeah.
some of that just happens kind of naturally. And again,
Yeah.
because I value knowledge translation, and I feel very strongly that clinicians, the value we bring to any patient engagement is the fact that we have a vast clinical knowledge, and we can bring that expertise to bear in a client specific situation. A lot of what we do is educate. Sometimes that education means that the patient decides, or the prospective patient decides they want to come into the clinic. sometimes they can manage it on their own, but now
Mhm.
they know that you actually cared about them. It wasn't self-serving. It wasn't like you were just, like some of our dentist friends say, if you're not drilling, you're not billing. Like
That's
sometimes we
right.
do things that are non-billable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have a dental appointment coming up, so thanks for mentioning that. My anxiety just went through the
Hopefully no
roof.
drilling.
Yeah, exactly. No, hopefully not. Well, he's my brother, so he should be good. Now, where do you see healthcare going? And you mentioned you hope that you'll have made a difference in healthcare. What difference do you want to make, and where do you see this going?
Sure. I would like the difference that I would like to make is just the highlighted emphasis on the individual person receiving healthcare. And where I think it is going ultimately, and you can already see this in some of the tech that's been brought into the space, some of the policies that have been instituted by some of the big payers, value-based reimbursement and the like. Um, that we're getting to the point, and healthcare is moving to the point very much so, where you almost can have, because technology has made it so available,
Mhm.
have unique kind of like patient journeys. So instead of it being, going back to the shoulder that we talked about earlier, like, okay, this patient has a rotator cuff injury, this is the workflow that we do them, or that they work through, because technology is now making some things accessible that weren't accessible, or just decreasing the cost to deliver more individualized care, frees up
Mhm.
clinicians' time, whatever it is. You can have a situation now where maybe Rafi has a rotator cuff injury and Paul has a rotator cuff injury, and based off of, maybe markers or risk factors or comorbidities or whatever, they can now go through the exact same organization, and they can work through different workflows,
Mhm.
or different patient journeys, if you would, to end up hopefully with the same result, which is pain-free overhead movement, and not having to do surgery, or even if they do need surgery, like not having to be debilitated because of their shoulder pain or their rotator cuff injury. So that's
Sure.
definitely where we're moving. I think we're still maybe a decade or so from being able to do that, but healthcare is the technology in the space is
Mhm.
moving so quickly, probably like other industries, but it's moving so quickly that some of the things that cost us a lot of money 5 years ago don't cost us nearly as much money now. So I think
Yeah.
it's one of those things that we'll get there eventually.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Okay. Well, then, until we get there, what's next for you?
I don't really know yet. I'm doing, obviously, continuing to work with healthcare organizations. Been working a lot recently with healthcare technology companies and innovative
Okay.
healthcare companies,
Yeah.
that are trying to bring some of these tools to the market. A lot of times, what
Mhm.
we see is you get like an awesome tool or an awesome piece of software that's going to free up clinicians' time. Maybe it'll even increase bottom line for the clinical organization. Everybody sees the value of it, but the clinicians aren't using it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm helping some of these companies with like, okay, like how do we get utilization? How do we decrease some of the friction for using the product or getting the product into
Yes.
clinical workflows?
Mhm.
Doing a lot of strategy around that. Um, and I don't know really. I mean, at some point, I guess I'll sell the clinic down the line. Maybe we'll see. I'm
Yeah.
having fun now doing it, but I'm planning on a second book, which is going to be called Bottom Up Healthcare.
Okay.
Release date maybe 2027 at this rate, depending depending on what goes on. But yeah, just that, consulting, the podcast, doing the work I'm doing now,
Very good. Well,
trucking
that's
along.
awesome. Well, it'll be exciting to follow along as you get to each of those pieces and expand each of those pieces. I hope that we don't have to wait till 27 to get the next book released.
Yeah,
But until then, thank you very much for being here. And
yeah,
yeah, I'm going to go think about that dental appointment that you just reminded me of. Thanks, Rafi.
awesome. Yep, take it easy.
See ya.